Welcome to the Scale Ups podcast, where each week you get to hear Sean Steele, professional CEO, growth mentor, and advisory board chair, unpack the strategies that successful founders have used to achieve scale in their businesses. Stay tuned as he interviews the entrepreneurs who've made it, learns from industry experts, and follows a group of founders still striving to scale.
G'day everyone, and welcome to the Scale Ups podcast, where we help first-time founders learn the secrets of scaling so they can fulfill the potential of their businesses, make bigger decisions with greater confidence, and maximize the value and impact they can create in the world. I'm your host, Sean Steele, and I'm joined today by John Katzman, current founder and CEO of Noodle in the US, founder and former CEO of 2U, and founder and former CEO of and chairman of the Princeton Review. How are you today, John?
I'm great. How are you, Sean?
Excellent, mate. I'm very pleased that we're on the phone, on Zoom or whatever you want to call it. Those who are listening might remember I interviewed Richard Katzman back in episode 2, whose last name may sound familiar, who scaled Kaz.com from 5 mil to 500 mil over 32 years. And we were introduced because you guys are brothers. So clearly entrepreneurialism really runs in the family, hey? It's
something our dad taught us right from the start, that it's just the funnest thing you could do. And he's been on my board and I've been on his board pretty much right along.
Oh, cool. Nice. Oh, with Richard.
Yeah.
Oh, beautiful. And are there other Katzmans running around in the wings that are also scaling, unicorns and things?
We have a younger sister who went to law school and clerked and has been practicing kind of legal things forever. And
okay.
Clearly the smart one, but not the entrepreneur.
Didn't want to be at the helm. Got it. No worries. Well, look, for those who aren't familiar with some of the brands, I might just give a quick overview. So Princeton Review, you founded in 1981, you scaled that over 25 years to 2007. And that business was about sort of helping students deal with the college grad school admissions processes. And that's still going today. And that's sort of, north of 1,500 employees and still north of 100 million revenue. 2U, you then founded in 2008. Scaled rapidly over the 4 years to 2012, more than 3,000 employees today, helped bring the universities online, which was a really critical period in education globally in doing that. And then you started Noodle later in that year of 2012, which is still running today, 340 full-time equivalent employees, and you're helping universities and schools use tech to lower costs and raise that sort of student to faculty engagement. And 5 years ago, you were actually pre-revenue. So you were at $0 revenue 5 years ago, and the business is now already, this will be the third company that you've taken to north of 100 mil in revenue. Is that right?
It's pretty right. When I left 2U, I actually started a studio called the Noodle Companies, and I had a whole theory that I could find startup CEOs and coach them and help them solve different problems in education. A couple years later, I founded Noodle around 2015, and what has become Noodle, and ran that one myself. So it was pre-revenue because it was really just a gleam in my eye.
Yeah. Well, I want to come back to the studio concept later on. I know we had a bit of a chat about that offline. I think that's a really interesting stage in your journey. But maybe
it's a terrible idea. But we'll come back to that.
And those are good fun to unpack, I think, because they're always great in hindsight. What led you to start this business? From my understanding, you were studying architecture at Princeton around the time that you started Princeton Review. Is that right? Can you tell me about kind of what the genesis was for Princeton Review?
It is. I majored in engineering for a couple of years and then switched to architecture. And I never really intended to be an architect. I'm really actually pretty excited about urban planning and still am. But an architectural training was fascinating in terms of what it teaches you about iteration and about kind of an openness to sharing ideas and loving the criticism, loving the feeling that people are picking at it and that you have to defend ideas. As it might be something you don't like and I do like, but there's a reason I did it. It's not random. And so I think it was a good training in sort of design thinking to be an entrepreneur. But it was never the plan to be an architect.
Right. Were you thinking about that business whilst you were doing your architecture degree? What was the moment where you went, I'm going to go and start this thing?
Tutored when I was in college and just loved it. In the U.S., the big test is the SAT, the college admissions test, and makes teaching for a test like that so different from teaching in a school is you spend 0% of your time motivating anybody. They are wildly motivated. And so now it's just a matter of focusing their energy and calming them down and then doing your job as a teacher. And the other good thing about it is that people are willing to pay you well. So I just thought it was a fun job and that it would be fun to start a tutoring company in New York and make a little bit of money and use that money to start a software company. And then Princeton Review kind of took off and I went with it.
Cool. So that, I'm conscious that in the amount of time that we've got and the illustrious career you've had, we're going to have a real difficulty in unpacking, every single one of those journeys because each one of them was, distinct in and of itself. But some of the things that I'd love to draw out from you today were some of the, in hindsight, you've got the real opportunity to look at these three distinct chapters and go, okay, what were some of the themes or what were some of the learnings that actually I can draw across that as a whole chapter? And one of the things I'd love to start with is actually funding, because funding is always a hot topic for people who are looking to scale. Fundamentally, some of them are still bootstrapping it, some of them are using funding, some don't know what kind of funding might be available to them or how best to leverage it. And I believe you bootstrapped Princeton, but you became more sophisticated in your understanding of funding and how to leverage other people's capital over time. Can you talk to me a bit about how you thought about funding over the course of these journeys and what you've learned through that? Sure.
Princeton Review, it was really started in 1981, and the VC community was still pretty small back then, and I didn't know about it. And it didn't even occur to me to raise significant money from outside. So we did bootstrap it the whole way. And that's a long road. So it did take 20 years to get public. The 2U, I raised about $100 million prior to the IPO. And we were public within, I don't know, six years of launch, maybe seven. And how
many rounds of funding were in that 100 mil?
There were 4 rounds.
Okay.
And at Noodle, we just finished a Series C round that we'll announce, I think, tomorrow, of $50 million. So total funding with that will be 120. And hopefully that is the last round pre-IPO on that one. So the ability to access capital, I think, is a huge accelerant to growth. And I always take more than I want. I don't want dilution, but I also don't want to be back fundraising 30 minutes from now.
Yeah, right. What would be a typical length between those funding rounds? So if we maybe go back to you, how much time would have been between those funding rounds?
So when I'm doing it right, I look at a round in the following way. First, I know it's going to take 3 or 4 months to get it done. Mm-hmm. So don't do it when you're running out of money. Do it when you still got some runway. Second, we're trying to raise enough money to take us 18 months, but our projections are always optimistic. So it really means somewhere between, 13, 15 months. Mm-hmm. Third, you do it in stages, a serious research phase. Who are the funds that are interested in your sector, are not already funding a competitor, are early enough in their fund that they're doing something early stage, right? Because late in a fund, you're really just doing follow-on investment for the most part. And so it's too late for those guys, and funds you hear good things about that you think they'd be, a real addition to your board. So finding those guys, like just creating a list of who are the 30 or 40 funds I want to go after.
Yeah.
And what are their email addresses, and other contact information. And then when you're kicking off, you're ready to cast the right size net. I think one of the big mistakes people make is they go after too few funds, and then, just the usual winnowing. And all of a sudden you've got one guy who, he better invest or you're in trouble.
Yeah, no options. And so do you find, and has it always been the case that, or did it change over time, that you are proactively doing that sort of, are you doing that diagnostic every time you're about to think about a round? Are you sort of recutting it, or is it more like, hey, this is the funds that we want to be on this whole journey?
Well, over time, there are people who I'd love to invest because they know my industry, they're smart, they're honest, they're great to work with. You can feel them trying to help you scale your business versus a kind of deadwood. But at the same time, every time you raise, your company's in a different place. And so you might be going after somebody who's later stage instead of earlier stage. And again, some of the funds that were at the right time, now within their fund, they're at the wrong time, or they invested in the meantime in a competitor. So it's worth refreshing your list each time.
Yeah, got it. And so are you thinking how often are these funds, adding more to their investment in each round, and how often are they sort of getting off the carousel at each round?
No one's ever gotten off.
Okay.
They may pass. There are times that, there are limits to how big a part of a fund you can, any one investment can be.
Yeah.
But generally they've gone in on the next round, and certainly no one's sold. And I think it would be weird to sell. It would be quite a terrible message. So that is not often done.
Yeah. Okay. And so what else have you, in that process, what else do you feel like you've learned about funding? Because it sounds like you've maybe had a more concentrated period, or maybe it's similar. In 2U to Noodle, is the amount that you've raised, it sounds like you've maybe raised a little bit more. In Noodle, did you do it in a more concentrated period? Like, is the growth trajectory different?
No, the growth trajectories are actually pretty similar. And this round, we haven't spent any of it yet.
Yeah.
So a couple things that I think are important. It's what documents you need to have in your pocket before you start. The first is your exec summary, like a page or two. This is who we are. This is what we're doing. And that's what you're sending out originally to the VCs.
Yeah.
And the point of that document is simply to get you a phone call. The point of the phone call is simply to get you a meeting. No one's going to invest on that document.
Yeah.
The second is the leave behind deck. And the leave behind deck is the wordy one, is the one that's talking a lot, and each slide has to explain itself, because when the partner gives it to another partner, someone else, he has to understand it. But the third, which you create from the leave behind deck, is the one with no words, which is a presentation deck. And I saw a great TED talk with David Rose, where he talks about raising money from VCs, and the biggest insight, it's an amazing talk, but the biggest insight was, look, you're the preacher and it's the choir. Like, the deck can't do the talking. You don't want them to say, boy, that company has a good deck. You want them to say, that company has a great CEO. So you are giving the insight, and it is singing hallelujah. And so the leave behind deck is the wordy thing that you can give them afterwards, but the presentation deck, it's really just images that reinforce what you're saying, graphs, charts, or just a picture.
Yeah.
And then finally, and obviously you've got a pro forma that makes sense and that's clear. And then finally, you've got your FAQ. And we think about, before we go out, what are the questions people are going to ask? and what's a 2-sentence answer? And every time I give a presentation and I can't give a 2-sentence answer to a question, I know I've lost them. And we go back, we think about what's the answer to that question, and then we are ready for it the next time, because pretty much people ask the same questions. So, it's an iterative thing. Every so often someone asks a question and actually you don't have an answer. It's a flaw. There's a problem in your model. And that takes more iteration.
Yeah. And how much of I think people will be curious when you're doing this much, raising, and that kind of raising of capital is critical in a business that's scaling so fast. How much of your time, if you thought about it just on a percentage basis, would you spend thinking about funding, going after funding? You've obviously got other people in the business, CFO that might be helping you and so on, but how much of your time do you think gets invested on an annual basis in thinking about the raising and the financial side? Not the operating financials, but
I've had spectacular CFOs for both of these businesses. Rob Cohn, who wasn't even a finance guy, never finished college, but brilliant and an operator and, just a compelling person. And now Meredith Rubel, and both of them do the heavy lift in terms of helping create the list and then getting that first thing. If we want to bring in a banker for a later round, picking the banker. Generally, I'm doing the presentation. An investor wants to see the CEO.
Yeah.
And the later the stage, the more involved I am. But you're pretty involved, and I'll tell you, in both of my last two companies, before we raised, it was my money, and I don't perform as well when it's my money.
How does it influence your decisions?
Well, first of all, you're just more disciplined, right? Someone's looking over your shoulder. You don't want to spend it stupidly. Whereas you get lazy sometimes. But second, and more importantly, I think it's if you've got the right kind of investors, or even the right kind of non-investors, the funds you're talking to who are smart, they're banging on your model. Tell me about your TAM. No, that's bullshit. Look over here. What do you think of that competitor? What do you think of that? A change coming in regulation or something, and it's that back and forth that just starts focusing the business in a completely a terrific way. And so I'd like to think I'm involved not just to present, but to do the back and forth that really helps me steer the business.
I love that.
Or sculpt the business.
Yeah, well, I can imagine sometimes when founders are thinking about their first raising, it's almost it can be quite an intimidating process for them. They're sort of worried about what those investors are, going to be saying, or that they may not have the answer. But to your point, actually the quality of those questions can really help to sharpen the way that you think about the market, because you might get some real insights through what it is that you need to respond to.
I think so. I think of all the documents I mentioned, the FAQ is the most important one, that you're really thinking because even just preparing for questions, if you're with the right team, it forces you to think a little bit deeper.
What about, if we shift away from funding and think about strategy, when you think about the sort of strategies you've put in place to win fundamentally in those businesses, to take market share, to be the leader, have the right products and services, when you think back on it, which are some of those strategies that you think, wow, that decision actually really changed the dial on our ability to grow, either because it stimulated a lot of demand, or it captured demand better, or it did a much better job in providing service? Or when you think back on strategies, which are the ones that you really feel like made a big difference in your ability to grow?
At Princeton Review, I came up with the thought of here's the curve of the market, right? And everybody, there are people who aim at the super expensive part, small but very profitable, and there are people who aim in the middle, where the most of the people are. And I've tended to aim, starting at Princeton Review, about one click south of the right flank. So the Acura, kind of BMW, not the Maserati.
Yeah.
Right. And for the people in the middle, it's aspirational. For the people at the extreme who are actually cost conscious at all, it's a really good product and it's not stupid expensive. And thinking about who your client actually is, I think has been an important part of each one of these companies. Who are the schools I want to get in bed with? The original name of 2U was Tutor, number 2, TOR. After my old dog Tor. It was like a toast to this dog who came into the office with me at Princeton View, was literally 6 feet away from me for 15 years. We were running together. And people would say, well, why are you naming this company after a dog? And I'd say, well, I could name it dog. The brands I'm dealing with, the USC, UNC Chapel Hill, Georgetown, they're 300-year-old or several hundred-year-old global institution. I mean, these are incredible brands, billion-dollar, multiple billion-dollar brands. There's no intel inside. This is no like people want to know who I am. We are there to support them. Yeah. We are not a brand. And the feeling of being humble about your brand, especially as a startup, is also part of that. But working with the schools, those are schools that are like just at the cusp of being Harvard.
Yeah.
But a little bit more approachable, a little bit more accessible.
I like that. Yeah, wow, I can see how that would have made a big difference. And just going back to brands, did Noodle, what was the genesis for Noodle as a name?
I don't know if that word is used as much in Australia, but it means to think creatively is to noodle on something. You know, your brain is called, some people call it your noodle. But it's like thinking, but more fun.
Got it. Yeah. Okay. I'm interested, John. I mean, these are, I understand the passion for the sector, but what makes you come alive in business, and how do you feel like that's sort of shown up in these companies that you've built?
I love building a good team. And there are moments where you just look around, you know, and you're just so happy to be part of this team. Like, he's really good at that. She's great at that. And everybody knows their position, they know their lane, and they're good at it. And there's that camaraderie that builds as that team kind of fleshes out, and as you start understanding the job better and the business better, that's really rewarding. We just were named, you know, a best place to work in New York by Cranes, and I think we had the same kind of award at 2U, and at Princeton Review we had some articles about it. At Princeton Review we had over 100 marriages.
Wow.
And it wasn't that big a company, because you're finding great people and bring them together towards a mission. And that is killer.
That lights you up.
Yeah.
I like that. What about...
I'll say one more thing. I'm giving you very long answers, and I apologize.
No, not at all. Fine.
I'm personally motivated by saving a princess and by killing a dragon. And one or the other is not really enough. Like, there's got to be something I'm doing, something the company's doing to make the world better, and something we're doing to make the world less bad.
By kind of eradicating poor quality competition, is that?
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. And everybody gets motivated differently, and some people pick more up on the first, and a couple of us also are motivated by the second. But the mission of the company is important too, and it's part of what gets me excited.
You'd probably agree with me. I talk to private clients a lot about the idea that if you have the best product or service, like, you know, you've seen everything that competitors got, you know what the feedback is on them, and if you've got the best product or service, it's absolutely incumbent upon you to scale, because to the extent that you don't, you are just robbing the world of value and those potential customers of value. And they end up taking inferior products and services, having a terrible time of it, not getting what it is they were looking for. And all that value sort of being diminished, it's tarnishing the industry out. Really kills me. And some of those, the thing that is like, well, some of those founders are just, they may not have a better product or service, but they're sort of out businessing you. You know, they're actually out competing you. They're doing a better job on customer acquisition. They may or may not be doing a better job on retention, but fundamentally they're going to gain market share because you don't have the game of business sort of locked up yet.
I couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
Like, you know, people think of selling, they think of like used car salesmen. We're all selling all the time. You're selling the concept, you're selling an idea, you're selling a service or a product. And if you believe it's great, and if you're not full of crap, what's wrong with that?
Yeah.
Like if you have a great idea about, you know, how we can solve this problem and you don't talk up, you've made the world worse. You're totally right.
Yeah. Yeah, I agreed. When you think back on it, maybe this, I might know the answer to this because we talked a bit about the Noodle companies, the studio scenario. Talk to me about your biggest mistake and what you learned from that.
So my mantra, and I can see it really clearly in other companies and other people, and sometimes I just miss it of my own, is that the plural of focus is lack of focus. There's no such thing as being focused on several things. So the idea of starting a studio is you're going to have these great companies and that you can just like touch each one every once a week or once a month or once a quarter, and, you know, and it'll spring to life. And actually startups are hard, and the kind of people who are great, kind of guns for hire, who can take a company that's ongoing and 10x it over time, are not really the same kind of people who can start from something from scratch, where there is no thing to grow. There's everything you do is kind of wrong. It sounded good in the business plan, and then you get into it and you're like, okay, this has to change this way and this has to change this way. And one by one, you're kind of knocking down all of your errors, all the preconceptions that were wrong, and sculpting. And by the way, changing your team, you know, because again, you brought together a bunch of people and some of them turned out to be not the right people for those positions. And so there's an awful lot of twisting and turning, and I wouldn't call it pivoting, because my businesses end up looking very much like, to an outside eye, like what we said we would do, but nothing is the same.
Yeah.
And so I had this studio, and just none of them went anywhere. And it was the most frustrating thing. And God, being a VC would probably kill me.
Better to be on your side of the table with your skill set. Yeah, I think that's so true. I think you even see that in the startup community when they're looking for great talent, and they often pull in great talent from, you know, big companies into a really startup environment. And those people, many of them just massively struggle because they're used to structure and order and, you know, things that work and process. And then it's like, oh, no, you got to do all those things, all of them yourself, all the time. And it's just relentless and ongoing and 24/7. And sometimes that's a really difficult fit to make. And I can see that, you know, the people who are good at scaling are not necessarily the people who are good at finding product market fit in the first place and getting, you know, an MVP off the ground.
And by the way, I totally respect that skill set. It's just a different skill set. So if you're a startup pitcher and you can take the team into the 5th or 6th inning, it's a US metaphor and I apologize.
No, that's okay. We'll get it.
And you hand the ball to the next guy, and, you know, and that's an important role also. When I'm talking to kids right out of school about joining a startup versus joining an established company, a great established company has great systems, and they're going to teach you those systems, and you're going to get it. You're going to understand why those systems exist and that they're good, and you're going to be able to implement them anywhere you go. A startup is going to teach you to figure it out. Like, it's all up, go, and hopefully you're going to have to bleep out half of what I'm saying, and I apologize.
That's fine.
But you're going to learn how to solve problems.
Yeah.
And that's valuable too.
Yeah, I agree. When you think back on your most challenging time in any of these companies, what would you say what's the first one that springs to mind?
There have been a bunch. The one that comes to mind, I had this super MBA CFO at Princeton Review, great guy, again, refugee from, in that case, Wall Street, which is, I think, an even tougher fit than a larger company. And everything was going well, and we're working, getting ready for an IPO. And he comes in one day at 5 o'clock. He says, well, I got some bad news. Like, we're out of cash, and we're missing a couple $1 million. And I don't think it was stolen. We just counted wrong. And I don't know what to do. And therefore the financing is probably going to be really hard because our accounting systems are clearly all in disarray. And then I made the problem worse because I let him go. And that feeling of your first job as CEO is not to run out of cash, right? That's when they take away the football. And understanding your metrics and understanding your financial metrics and understanding your cash and your runway and having a CFO focused on those things. We can all get all caught up in product and sales and growth in your team. But the biggest mistakes I've made are all around that. Just take my eye off the cash.
And it's interesting, isn't it? Because some people go, yeah, but that's your job, right? It's to delegate to them. Aren't they supposed to be responsible for it? And I always think, you need to know enough about each of those functional jobs, those direct reports, particularly finance, to know what it is that you're looking for, to make sure, as you said, that individual is focused on it, that you can see those metrics. That's not micromanaging. That's just sort of expectation management. It's like, hey, I know these things are important. Let's make sure they're part of our game plan.
Well, you think about being a parent of a little kid, and what are the metrics for a kid's health? Things like, your temperature and your reflexes or whatever. But your kid walks in the room, and from across the room, you say, he's got a cold, right? Like, there's certain things you just know. You don't need to measure them. You know them. And they're not many things, but when you talk to managers, and it's like, what are the numbers that you just know intuitively? You don't have to look at the latest report. You know how much we're going to grow. You're head of sales. You know how much we're going to grow this quarter. And you might bullshit me, but you know what it is. And if you don't, you're not very good at sales, right? And if you're the accountant, if you're the CFO, you know your cash, you know your runway, you know your profit margins. And within any division of any company, within any stage of the company, there are going to be different metrics that you should know like that, but they're never more than like 3 of them for any one person. It's like, what are the things that I just should be able to answer like that? I don't have to look it up. Yeah, I agree.
Let me ask you, when you think back on your time that you've had in these 3 companies, is there something that you would do differently? Which is always such an easy question to ask when you're on the other side of that. Yeah, everything. But is there anything particular that sort of jumps out to you, actually, I really would have, taken a different approach there had I had my time over again, knowing what I know now?
My biggest flaw at Princeton Review, I think, was we were scaling nicely. And then as the market got more competitive and as we had scaled, we had offices in, we had 20 countries and a bunch of states. I started a little bit crawling into our own butts. Like you've got a business that's like this, and you start thinking about incremental sales to existing clients, taking a $6 sale, making it a $7 sale, versus how is this as a platform, and how do we really solve somebody's next problem that's a $60 problem, right? So problem number 1 is just lifting up your eyes sometimes. And that, again, is where VCs are really good, that they can help you see.
Keep challenging.
Because, they're challenging you, and they're up there in the atmosphere, kind of looking at things, and you're down on the ground a lot of times. And so it's really helpful to have people to help you see around the corner. Switching metaphors, sorry. The second one, I think, is a problem probably a lot that you probably had and that a lot of entrepreneurs have. When someone's the wrong person, private equity guys will fire him way too soon, and entrepreneurs will fire him way too late.
Yeah.
And part of building loyalty is being loyal. But if someone's really struggling in a job, it's not necessarily loyal to the company or loyal to the person to let them twist in the wind and give someone support. Donald Burr once said to me, he founded People Express in New York, an incredible entrepreneur, in the US rather. He said, you've got to give your people unconditional love. And when you can't, then you have to fire them. Like, that middle ground is just horrible.
Yeah.
And
I always think when they're struggling, they're not having any fun either. And there is a job, there is a company, there is a condition in which that person is really going to fly. And if they are massively struggling and you've given them good quality feedback and you've shown them the way and you've given them support and you've given them a chance, and they're still not there. And the hardest ones, of course, are the ones that do just sort of good enough that you're like, I really don't want to let them go, but they're just not quite there. That, their opportunity to actually feel successful is being limited by staying.
That's right. And it's the people who are really good people, because it's easy when, we've had at all my companies kind of a no assholes rule. And we take it seriously. If there are the high performing person who's not a good person, we have no problem letting go. And everybody talks about that problem. To me, it's a simple one. Yeah. But a good person who's struggling, and it's like, wow, that's killer. But you're totally right. Like, in the end, they're going to be happier and more successful, and you just got to help them find that. And the way I end up making it okay for myself to do it is just paying too much severance. Because it's a choice. I can either overpay on severance, or I can hold on to the person an extra 6 months, and that's not good either. Yeah. Yeah. I like that. That's an interesting strategy. So if you were to now go out into the future, what does Noodle look like 3 years from now? So the first stage of the company was to help schools use technology to build online programs of quality and scale, and to help them understand kind of the digital world. The second stage is to do that not just for degree programs, but for non-degree certificates and courses. And we're launching that in January. The stage behind those is, if you look at every other sector of the economy, we moved from online and on ground to just a fluid business. Home Depot doesn't care if you buy this hammer in the store, or you buy it online and pick it up at the store, or they deliver it. It's all one system. The ads are for Home Depot. And universities aren't there yet. They're still thinking about online as a silo, and helping them campus, see it as a fluid. These are all just my students. This is my faculty, and this course is online, and it was on ground, except there's a storm coming, or this professor's sick, and so it's online, or there's any number of opportunities. You get transferred. So I'd like to see us as more profoundly connected to the school, not just supporting their online efforts, but supporting their efforts. Yeah. Oh, I really like that. And I think in education, that's so true. I think that's so true globally. It's certainly true in Australia, in Australian universities, and many private institutions still very much, online versus on campus. And we all know that actually
the best student outcomes are actually achieved in blended scenarios. Every bit of data points to that. Finding ways to create the right experiences in a face-to-face, be it virtual or be it with, people, some kind of social learning experience, and finding the ways to teach the boring stuff that people can do in their own time in a way that's convenient to them. All that makes sense. So I think that's an exciting future. I've got one last question for you, and I ask this to each of the founders I interview, and it's a little segment called Above All Else. So I want you to think much further out now to your, let's call them your yearning years. You've I don't know how many more businesses you're going to build, but probably a few. Let's assume you've done with the business, the business building. Maybe you've lost a little bit of energy. You've still got a lot of wisdom in your head. Everything, your faculty is working very well. And the global CEO of the world's largest community of first-time founders calls you and says, John, I've got tens of millions of first-time founders around the world who are hungry for information about how to scale their businesses. And I want to give you a sort of once in a lifetime opportunity to crystallize your 3 above all else's, which would be to finish this sentence. Above all else, the 3 things you must get right as a founder if you want to scale are what? What would be your 3 above all else's?
First is TAM. There are an awful lot of founders who really don't understand their addressable market. And you lead off almost in a deck, and they're saying things, this is like a $6 billion opportunity or addressable market. You're like, you're just wrong. You're just making it up. And to some degree, they know that it has to be fairly large because otherwise they're not investable, right? It's kind of a lifestyle business, which could be a great business, but it's not a professional capital. And so they have every incentive to jack that number up beyond reason. So the first thing is pick a business that has truly a significant TAM, at least $1 billion US, and be hard on that number. Like, know it, understand it, and don't buff it.
Bullshit
Don't
yourself.
don't bullshit yourself. Much more importantly than bullshitting investors. The second is team. I'm not big on partners, and I look at a lot of businesses that it's 2 people. Somebody's a really good engineer, somebody else is really good at sales, and they get together and say, let's do something together, and we'll just split equity. And there's so many problems with that. A company has somebody who runs it, and giving people options. I'm all for equity, even some founder stock, but who's the person whose business this is? I think there's got to be real clarity. It can't be that when there's a hard conversation, a difficult topic, we're just going to look mean at each other until we agree. Like somebody's got to make a decision. So the notion of finding great teammates who aren't necessarily partners, but who are, co-founders in a very real way, like they're part of the founding team, and loving them and building together, but in kind of a constitutional monarchy. Somebody's making decisions, but it's not a vote, but everybody's involved. And the third one, life is short, and you're working an awful lot of it as a startup CEO. You really have to, like I've heard people say, this is just a business, right? To me, the why, the fact that you're pulling together this team to solve a problem, the quality of that problem, this is really a problem I want to solve, I ache to solve. And the quality of the team, these are people I want to go drinking with. These are people I want to hang with because I'm going to be with them a lot. To me is really important. And it's not just a job. A startup is a mission. And you'd really like to pick a good mission and pick teammates for that mission that everybody's going to be watching each other's back because there are a lot of snipers out there.
Wow, that is absolute gold. I really appreciate that, John. And I think those are really wise. And thanks for really thinking about that. I think that's super instructive. I'd really like to acknowledge the way that I would love to chat to you just all day about these businesses, and I've really enjoyed interviewing you. And I'd like to acknowledge the way that you've built these businesses. I mean, you have just a tremendous amount of energy as an individual to have tackled. I love the fact that you're staying in education and that you are finding different ways, because to your point, you understand what the TAM is. You're really good at building a team, and you've got a really clear personal drive around solving some of these problems, because clearly things that irritate you or that you can see coming down the line that are problems for your clients that you're like, that just has to be solved, and it has to be solved in a better way than somebody else is willing to stake their claim to doing it. And I just love the way that you have infused that in your team, and I'm sure people are really finding it challenging and really enjoyable working in your businesses. How do people get in contact with you or follow along with what you're doing at Noodle?
I wish I were better at social media, and I'm not, but those were very kind words, and thanks. I'm just J Katzman at noodle.com.
Okay. Awesome.
JKATZMAN.
And then noodle.com for anyone who wants to follow that, which I'm sure is on all the socials. Well, folks, I hope you really enjoyed the show today. It's been an absolute pleasure interviewing you, John. Huge thanks to you. Folks, if you've enjoyed what you've heard, obviously we'd love if you leave a review. Really helps the algorithms, help the podcast find more people. You can jump on scaleupspodcast.com. You can leave your email there, and we'll let you know when episodes are about to drop, or free tools and resources provided by founders. If you love the socials, you can jump on at Scaleups Podcast on all the usual socials. But remember that you've heard from someone today who's really had some pretty significant effort and investment. And I reckon John's faced some pretty tough times over that journey. There's probably times where John's felt like getting off the bus. But the only thing that's going to guarantee that you won't scale, there's no guarantees that you will scale, but the only thing that's guaranteed that you won't scale is actually giving up. So you have to stay unshakable in your faith that you're going to get there, and you have to remain flexible in your approach. And when you need help, ask for help. You've been listening to the Scale Ups Podcast. I'm Sean Steele. I look forward to speaking with you again very soon. Thanks so much, John.
Thank you, Sean. Totally fun.
G'day everyone, just a couple of quick things before you go. If you have questions that you'd love myself or an upcoming guest to tackle about challenges that you're facing in scaling your business, please just jump straight on the website, scaleupspodcast.com. You can record your message straight from your mobile by hitting the button on the right-hand side of the page, or you can just email them the old-fashioned way, questions@scaleupspodcast.com. And just a quick reminder, nothing we spoke about today constitutes financial or business advice. If you are considering making big decisions in your business, seek out a professional who can look at your situation in detail and make sure you're getting sound, personalized advice. Thanks for listening. Look forward to being back in your podcast feed next week.